Tatcee Macabuag. I'm from Migrant Forum in Asia. Probably while we're still setting up, I just wanted to introduce my organization. I'm from Migrant Forum in Asia. It's a network of different NGOs, civil society organizations, migrant organizations, trade unions working in Asia to protect and promote the rights of migrant workers. Oh, sorry. So we are a network of different organizations working in Asia, NGOs, migrant organizations, trade unions, and individuals working to protect and promote the rights of migrant workers. We are a member of the Migrants' Rights International, and we are here today as part of the Migrants' Rights International and to share our work and campaigns with regard to domestic workers in the region. Okay. Why is it not working?
Yeah, no, it's working. Do you want me to hit the button for you?
No, I'm good. So my presentation will focus mostly on the initiatives in Asia and what organizations in Asia are doing with regard to migrant workers, migrant domestic workers specifically. As what most of the other speakers have already mentioned, there is an upcoming ILO Convention on Domestic Work, and this is the first ever international law that deals with domestic workers, both local and migrant domestic workers. So these are the specific dates and specific initiatives that have already happened with regard to the ILO Convention on Domestic Work. So it started in 2008 with the governing body deciding to include domestic work as decent work for domestic workers as part of its agenda. And in March 2009, ILO released its first report, Law and Practice Report, along with a questionnaire on domestic workers. In June 2010, the discussion in the 99th session on domestic workers started. And in August 2010, the ILO released a third report called the Brown Report, which contains the draft instrument based from the deliberations of the International Labor Conference. And in March 2011, a new report will be released called the Blue Report, examining the responses from the governments with regard to the Brown Report and a revised draft instrument in the light of the comments received. In June 2011, the deliberations and discussions with regard to this convention will again take place in Geneva during the International Labor Conference. So engaging the ILO process, what have we been doing as an organization? We have conducted online and national consultations, sub-regional and regional consultations. As you know, Asia is one of the biggest regions where migrant domestic workers come from. And in Asia, we have around 63 million migrant workers, and many of them are domestic workers. So we organize consultations, capacity building programs with the migrant workers themselves, with the domestic workers, and we also work with trade unions in Asia with regard to capacity building and engaging governments in terms of advocacy for domestic workers. Aside from engaging the ILO, we also engage UN treaty bodies and mechanisms and other international platforms, like organizing side events, organizing dialogues with governments, the Committee on Migrant Workers, the Special Rapporteur on Migrant Workers. So we also engage with regional and international platforms as part of the Migrants' Rights International. As you see here, one of the meetings here in the photo on the upper part, that was a domestic workers meeting in Mexico during the People's Global Action on Migration, Development, and Human Rights, a people's civil society initiative in line with the Global Forum on Migration and Development. And in Asia, we also organized post-ILC meeting together with the ILO and other organizations, trade unions, domestic workers organizations, and migrant organizations, domestic workers organizations, both local and migrant, in terms of assessing our engagement with the ILO and how to move forward after the ILC in 2010. And aside from this, we work directly with domestic workers since my organization is a network of different organizations. So we engage in capacity building, information, education, and public mobilizations in relation to domestic workers' rights. So these are some of our members working with domestic workers, conducting information education, and we have an annual Migrants Campaign Month where we celebrate the victories and the migrant workers movement in the Asian region, and we organize like mobilizations, dialogues, and in here, in one of our members in Bangladesh, we managed to invite the chairperson of the Committee on Migrant Workers to encourage the Bangladesh government to finally ratify the Migrant Workers Convention, which will provide protection for the migrant workers from Bangladesh. And we also participated in the 2010 ILC. As you see, we also work with different networks through Migrants' Rights International, and some of the NDWN members here in New York also work with us, and we organize several activities both within the ILC and outside the ILC. Mobilizations, like we also have, like we organize a big concert for domestic workers during the ILC, and poster
Can you say
exhibit.
what ILC is?
ILC is International Labor Conference. This is for the 2010. So that June 2010 International Labor Conference, it constituted the outcome of the first discussion on the ILO Convention on Domestic Work. So these are the updates. You can get copies of my presentation later if you. So decent work for domestic workers was on the agenda. 7 countries in Asia voted to have a domestic workers convention. The U.S. Actually supported having a domestic workers convention, which was a little bit surprising for us advocates. The U.S. was very strong in terms of supporting a domestic workers convention. So different, and after the ILC, what has already happened in Asia? Different campaigns emerged calling for the adoption of an ILO convention, a global campaign, a steering committee for the global campaign for decent work and rights for domestic workers was set up in September 2010 as a result of civil society, domestic workers, and trade union participation in the ILC. And there are ongoing talks among governments on how to improve recruitment that will protect migrant domestic workers. And in India, domestic workers are now included in some existing welfare schemes, and specific welfare schemes for domestic workers is under discussion. And domestic work was also one of the issues highlighted during the 2010 Global Forum on Migration and Development in Mexico. However, the campaign and the work on domestic workers' rights is still ongoing, and we need to do more work. Because even if we have an ILO convention, there is still the work for campaigning for the ratification, for countries to actually ratify this convention, lobbying governments to implement this convention even if they ratify, and of course monitoring the dialogues and deliberations and continuing the lobby with the governments for the ILC this coming 2011, where they will finalize the text of the convention. So important dates to remember. In March 2011, the release of the Blue Report for the ILO Convention. And of course, there will be mobilizations on International Labor Day. And June 1 to 17 is the 100th session. It's the centennial of the ILC, and this is where they will be deliberating the Domestic Workers Convention. And for Asia, we are having an ILC preparatory meeting in Singapore together with the Singapore National Trade Union Congress. This will be on April 24 to 26 in Singapore. And the chair of the Workers' Committee, Halima Yaqub, will be present during the discussions. And I just wanted to show you updates on the global campaign on the rights of domestic workers. Some of the organizations here are actually members of the global campaign. And if you see, this is the logo of the global campaign. So the steering committee members are the International Domestic Workers Network, National Domestic Workers Alliance here in the US, the Respect Network in Europe, Migrant Forum in Asia, and the Asian Migrant Domestic Workers Alliance.